There was a time when Germany was cool. Well, let me rephrase this. There was a time when Germany was clearly considered a cool climate. The 50th degree latitude was the northernmost frontier for viticulture in the wine world, and it runs straight through the Rheingau region in the southern half of Germany. As temperatures increased, further wine growing regions were developed north of the Rheingau, for example Saale-Unstrut and Sachsen, but even those vineyards do not represent the northernmost frontier of the wine world anymore. Wines from Northern Europe might be the next big thing, as sparkling wines from England have performed really well on this channel, and there are Nordic winemakers trying to see how far they can push the boundaries. So let's find out whether the north of Europe has more to offer than aquavit, mead and beer. The Netherlands, or Holland, is a trading nation and was a major player in the wine and spirit trade. They were also tasked with draining the swampy Medoc to create space to grow vines. As they exported and imported wine, they also tried their hand in winemaking to less success. The new wave of Dutch winemakers started in 1967, according to the Oxford Companion to Wine, when Fritz Bosch planted his Lavantje vineyard of just 800 square meters. There are more than 100 winemakers in the Netherlands today working with grape varieties like Riesling, Müller-Thurgau and Auxerrois. We're starting off with the 2021 Apostelhoeve Cuvee 12 Brut from Maastricht in the Netherlands. This winery started in 1970. The first wine was made in 1972, and they are apparently the oldest winery in the Netherlands. They're farming 20 hectares of vineyards in the south of the Netherlands, and those vineyards are planted to Müller-Thurgau, Auxerrois, Riesling, Pinot Gris, and since 2020, Viognier. The wine is actually turned into a sparkling wine in the Ahr region in Germany, following the traditional method where you first create base wines and then you re-ferment those base wines, adding sugar and yeast in bottle. So basically like they do it in champagne. They named this wine Cuvée 12 because of the 12 apostles apparently, but I don't really know what they have to do with this wine. Whoa, that will leave a hole in the wall. So this wine is a blend of 50% Auxerrois, 25% Riesling and 25% Pinot Gris. That's kind of all I know. Look at that color. That's really golden. And the mousse kind of disappeared like within seconds, which is a bit strange. All right, so on the nose, the fruit comes through quite well, but it's more like bruised apple, slightly oxidized flavor. The yeasty notes aren't too pronounced, so they don't really hit you in the face. They are there, but fairly delicate. On the palate, this is actually quite intense and a little bit edgy. There's a slight bitterness there. It's grippy. There is, quite a lot going on. So I don't know whether my fact sheet is correct, because the alcohol is certainly not what it says on the back label. Here it says 12.5% of alcohol. On the fact sheet, it said that it only has 6 grams of residual sugar, but it feels like it's a fairly dry style. This grippiness, the slight bitterness comes out a little bit more if there's low dosage levels. I mean, this is certainly interesting, but I find it not really enjoyable. I think starting from the super golden color, which is a bit atypical for a sparkling wine, I would say the lack of mousse. There's also not too much CO2 here, which can be nice, but in this case, I think it's kind of missing. The nose isn't super precise. The fruit flavor feels a little bit off, and there's not a lot of yeastiness there. And that yeastiness is also missing on the palate, because if it would stay longer on the lees, I think it would be a little bit richer, less bitter. So yeah, I'm going to rate this 77 points. It's the best Dutch sparkling wine I've ever tasted, but it doesn't really play in the same league as some other sparkling wines coming out of other parts of the world. But I've been told that this is a big success and that it sells out on a regular basis, so that's great for them. And I think there's definitely potential there, and in the future this might be absolutely delicious. Who knows? So next up, we have the 2022 Schloss Rattey Solaris orange wine from Mecklenburg in the north of Germany. Schloss Rattey is a castle that was built in the 19th century. Today it's a hotel and one of Germany's northernmost wineries. They actually started viticulture 25 years ago, so this year is their anniversary. They farmed 35 hectares of vineyards planted to 16 different grape varieties. The problem with viticulture up north is that the growing window is so small. So from the time the vine starts growing to the time when you really have to harvest the grapes, that's not enough for most grape varieties to ripen fully. So that's why those northern growing regions mainly rely on grape varieties that ripen early and that are resistant to many diseases that would otherwise destroy the crop when the season is cold and wet. The grape variety Solaris ticks both boxes here. It's a peewee fungal disease resistant grape variety and it's therefore often planted in Northern Europe, but I've never tasted an orange wine made from Solaris. So let's see what we have here. The wine is definitely orange in color. It's kind of golden, dark golden. It almost looks like the sparkling wine that we had before. But yeah, on the nose, it is quite intense and it has this orange wine flavor. For me, many orange wines really have this pronounced apricot flavor and I get that here as well. There's also some passion fruit coming through. Really fruit driven, really intense, but quite appealing. There's also a little bit of soy sauce and meaty flavors here. On the palate, this is super intense, slightly grippy, really fresh and vibrant. There's a touch of bitterness here, but overall it's quite an interesting wine. Yeah, I gotta say I like this. This is good. Good stuff. I mean, it's not a great wine, but it's certainly a really interesting wine. And maybe this is an interesting route for those peewee grape varieties that don't always produce the most amazing wines, but used in a kind of specialty, novelty wine style like orange wine is not a bad idea because all of your preconceived notions of what white wine should taste like are out of the window. And yeah, for me, this works. So I'm going to rate this 85 points. I think it's a really good wine. We're moving on to Denmark, which has surprisingly a long history in winemaking going back to the Middle Ages, but it's not really a major wine producing country yet. The focus here is on hybrid and disease-resistant grape varieties like Regent and Rondo for reds and Orion and Solaris for whites. So we got another Solaris here. So here we have the 2022 Dyrehoj Vingaard Reserve Solaris from Zeeland in Denmark. And the owner, Tom Christensen, planted the vineyards in 2008, and he was formerly a pig farmer, apparently. So I read that they are the biggest winery in Denmark with 50,000 vines. And they actually have an Italian winemaker, Luca from Puglia, from the south of Italy, who studied winemaking in Geisenheim in Germany. They actually select the best Solaris grapes for this wine and ferment it in 50% US oak and 50% French oak. The US oak is new and the French oak is used. So I'm expecting a big and oaky wine here, but let's see whether that's actually in the case. Again, fairly dark in color. I mean, those Northern European wines, they have quite a lot of color. In this case, it's probably related to the fact that it was fermented and aged in oak. White wines tend to get a little more brown when you do that with them. On the nose, this is actually pretty impressive. I mean, it almost smells like, I wouldn't say it smells like white Burgundy. It smells like a Pinot Blanc, a good Pinot Blanc from Germany. So a good Pinot Blanc fermented in oak vessels. And yeah, they tend to have this flavor, a combo of white fruit, like peach, maybe a little bit of lemon flavor coming through as well. But on top of that, you have those hazelnut notes that come from the barrel. There's also a little bit of butteriness there, a little bit more aroma than what you would get, for example, from Chardonnay. But I think people might confuse this wine with Chardonnay. This is good. I'm surprised. I really am. I didn't expect this to be good. I mean, also reading that they're using so much oak there didn't really inspire a lot of confidence, but it's actually really well managed. I mean, the fruit still comes through. There is a lot of oak there, but it's still balanced. It is fresh and vibrant on the palate. The finish is really lively and long. I mean, it's not perfect, it's not great, but it's really, really good. I mean, I just had a look, and apparently this is also 50 euros retail, so it's definitely not a cheap wine. And at that price point, it's obviously, well, that's a competitive price point, but I still think this is worth tasting. I mean, it's really interesting, a really well-made wine from a country that no one really associates with winemaking. And I definitely would want to put this into a blind tasting with Chardonnays or other white wines fermented in barrique, because this will surprise people. So I'm going to rate this 90 points. I think it is a really delicious wine and definitely the best Danish wine I've ever tasted. We're continuing on our journey towards the North Pole, and we are in Sweden, where there is apparently a growing wine industry. The Swedish Wine Growers Association states that while the growing window might be fairly short, the Swedish vineyards actually get a lot of sunshine during those extremely long days in summer. However, viticulture focuses on early ripening hybrids. The fact that the Swedish wine industry is in the hands of the state-run monopoly doesn't make it very easy for Swedish wine growers to kind of build a business. So this is the 2021 Kullabergs Vingard Immelen, which apparently retails for 55 euros. The price point, again, might be a little bit off-putting to many people, but I'm guessing that viticulture in Sweden is really expensive, especially because everything is expensive in Sweden. Their main grape varieties are quite a list: Sauvignon Gris, Solaris, Donau Riesling, Muscaris, Auxerrois, and Johanniter, as well as Pinot Noir, Cabernet Noir, Rondo, Regent, and Pinot Noir. The grapes for this wine are sourced from the Kullabergs Vineyard in southern Sweden, and the wine consists mainly, again, of Solaris, which is aged on the fine lees for 9 months. And yeah, let's see what it tastes like. Again with that golden color. This is another expression of Solaris. I think I've never tasted this many Solaris in a row, and they all were quite different. This is quite a bit more fruit driven, so there's quite a lot of lemon character coming through, a little bit of peach, a little bit of apricot flavor. You can also smell the yeastiness, the flavor of freshly baked bread, and it's actually really nice. On the palate, it's actually really rich and grippy with a slight saltiness on the finish. There's also great freshness there, but it's 13.5% of alcohol, which is, I'd assume, quite a lot for Sweden, for Swedish wine. No, it's good. You know what? I'm actually thinking Alvarinho here. I mean, this has, some similarities to Alvarinho. In a blind tasting, I definitely wouldn't have said it's a Solaris from Sweden, you know. Again, I would say this is a 90-point wine for me, and I'm actually really surprised that I'm giving out such high scores in this tasting. We're moving on to Norway, and I found it quite funny that even the exhaustive Oxford Companion to Wine only dedicates one sentence to Norway, and it is: Norway has a vineyard on the southern coast in Kristiansand, although the Pinot Noir and Riesling vines have difficulty ripening a crop. That's it. So I'm tasting the 2022 Solaris Andante, which is made by the Italian engineer Danilo Costamagna, who moved from Piedmont to Norway, fell in love and chose to stay. Danilo started winemaking 7 years ago, and he currently farms 1 hectare of vineyards, mainly Solaris, planted along the Oslo fjord. Danilo also works as a consultant for other wineries, and in the future he wants to extend lees aging for his wines, reduce the amount of oak used, and also wants to play around with different grape varieties. Interestingly, due to the warmer and humid summers that they experienced recently, even Solaris had problems with mildew. So this kind of highlights how difficult viticulture in Norway must be. But now let's taste the stuff. So this is fermented at cool temperatures, and they don't do any malolactic fermentation. They also try to do as little with the wine as possible, so there's minimal filtration, and they only use small amounts of SO2. This certainly has a little bit of a natty dimension to it. I don't know whether they would consider themselves natural, but this has quite nutty flavors, bruised apple. It feels like it's a little bit oxidative, to be honest. So there's a little bit of bit of oxidative fruit flavor. Whoa. The acidity, man. Phew. You know, me being a German, I kind of am used to acidity, but this, mamma mia. I can see why he kind of wants to extend lees aging, because this might make the wine taste a little rounder and a little richer. Malolactic conversion would also be a good option, because this would reduce the harshness of the acidity, converting malic acid to a rounder, richer lactic acid. But yeah, this is definitely interesting, and it wakes you up in the morning. I mean, this has 13% of alcohol, so it's not unripe, but the acid, that's, whoa. The bruised apple character makes way for more fresher lemon zest flavors, ripe apple flavors. But yeah, overall, this is certainly really interesting, but not really enjoyable, in my opinion. So I'm going to rate this 75 points. I think this is definitely a really interesting wine, considering that it's from Norway and it's kind of a wine, but yeah, it's a little bit rough around the edges, or not just a little bit, it's rough around the edges. Woo-wee, man. So last but not least, we have the 2020 Cuvée Prestige from Chateau Alstrup in Denmark. This is actually a bottle that I have had for a while and haven't gotten around to tasting it. So let's open it up. So Chateau Alstrup is an 18th century farm. They planted grapes in 2004 and the first wine was made in 2006. They actually focus on red grape varieties here. So this is the only red wine in the tasting. And yeah, let's see whether red wine from the north of Europe can also be good. So the grape varieties here are Rondo and Regent. The wine went through malolactic fermentation. It was aged in oak and it was not filtered. So this certainly is really dark in color again, like a dark ruby kind of color. It smells quite good. There's cherry fruit flavor there, a little bit of blackberry character. It's quite clean, bright fruit flavor. It's not overpowering. It's actually moderate in intensity, but it's pretty good. On the palate, it's a bit light and a bit harsh. The tannins are not very intense. There's quite a lot of acidity there and not a lot going on the mid palate. I mean, it only has 12% alcohol, so you shouldn't expect too much kind of velvetiness, richness on the palate. But this is quite lean. Yeah, I mean, it is a really enjoyable little red wine. If you kind of drink this chilled with some food, I mean, you definitely should eat something like charcuterie or a pâté or something like that alongside with it to kind of make it appear a little rounder. This could be really enjoyable. However, I would rate this 76 points. I think, yeah, it's just a little too lean on the palate for my taste. But still, super interesting. I think super interesting summarizes it quite well. There were some outstanding wines here and some that weren't so exciting. But overall, this makes me feel really hopeful for the wines of Northern Europe. I think there's certainly some potential there for great wines coming out of Northern Europe. I mean, there are already great wines coming out of Northern Europe. Wines that I wasn't aware of at all. So my two favorites were those two, the two Solaris, one from Denmark and one from Sweden. They were expensive, but they also were really enjoyable. And I'm so tempted to put one of those wines into a blind tasting in the future. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. The question of the day is, have you ever tasted any wines from Northern Europe, Nordic wines, whatever you want to call them? Let me know down below in the comments. I hope I see you guys again very soon. Until then, stay thirsty.